Happy Chanukah, everyone. Chag Sameach. And you get used to it after a while, but more people are watching online than are right here. But that's how it is in technology. And I don't want to stop the technology, just be able to meet people. But if you remember the classes, they used to be quite full. So not to take away from any of... so pleasure to have you all. Happy Chanukah. We're now the fifth night of Chanukah, so we're like most of the days of Chanukah. There's 8 days, we're in the fifth. And Chanukah is, of course, the festival of light. And light is a tremendous, both simple but profound lessons that it offers us. So every year I try to choose another theme that we haven't spoken about before, but especially when you're familiar with modern physics. It's been the last century. So light has become a very prominent force that was once not really appreciated in science. In Judaism, light was always prominent. You know, you have the Chanukah menorah, of course, and you have the Shabbos candles and holiday candles. And you have in the temple the menorah that was lit every day, and very prominent role that it played. And you have even, God forbid, when a soul passes on, you also have lighting the Yizkor flames. So flames and light have always been a very central theme in Jewish thought. But as I said, recently science has caught up and began to appreciate light, Einstein's physics, and even later discoveries in the last century. So on a psychological level, which is what I'm going to focus on mostly, light offers us tremendous lessons, as I mentioned, in dealing with the struggles of our own personal lives. Because in very many ways you could just say, like when someone says, you know, I feel dark today, or I feel like consumed by my shadows, using a term from Carl Jung, or other expressions that essentially are the antithesis of light. And then, of course, you have the opposite, which is feeling bright, feeling illuminated, feeling light-spirited, the lightness of being, and so on. So the idea is one that we all relate to. So let's pose it in the form of a question, which is really, every time I ask this question, to people, including to myself, it always it has an element that it makes people uncomfortable, to be honest. It's one of the hard things to talk about. And that is, when you ask the question, what dominates and most of your time and energy? Fighting demons or illuminating life around you? And sadly, whether we admit it or not, the fact of the matter is we spend a lot of time. I can't speak for everyone. Everyone has to answer that question themselves. But we definitely spend a disordinate amount of time dealing with things like fears, anger, a lot of negative energy. And it's I'm not accusing anyone of anything, obviously, but it's just the reality of how we deal with issues. And it's very important to assess this, because the reason it's uncomfortable, because who wants to admit that most of my day, my waking hours, I'm focused on some type of something, either fears or inhibitions or despondence. But you have to ask yourself the question, what are the most predominant emotions in your life? If they are pessimism, lethargy, hopelessness, despair, anger, envy, vengeance, fear, then that's one response. Or is the predominant amount of time and resources, time and energy that you invest in things like hope, enthusiasm, optimism, happiness, joy, and so on. Now, I know many people will say I have a combination of both. Obviously, very few people have exclusively one or the other. But when you begin to really look at your life, and you can answer this question honestly, you can really get a very, I would say, very, what's the word I want to use, a very crystallized portrait, snapshot of what your life is like and what your challenges are like. So though I wouldn't force anyone to answer this question, but I think it's an important question to pose to yourself. because the fact of the matter is, let's just take an example of relationships. And I don't mean necessarily romantic relationships, any form of relationship, but especially personal ones, intimate relationships. So when you are posed with the opportunity of a new relationship, what's your first knee-jerk reaction? Is it one of tentativeness and fearfulness, or is it one of excitement and eagerness? Many of us, when we're faced with a new situation, our first reaction is to retreat, is to hide. And others embrace the opportunity or the moment. And these are things that are indicators of a lot what is going on inside of you. Now, you don't need to be a rocket scientist to understand that if you've grown up in an environment which disappointed you a lot, which may have even hurt you or abused you, especially at a young age, it's obvious that that's going to become your default state, where you're going to be a lot more cautious and a lot more wary before you allow someone in or before you allow yourself to trust. Someone, on the other hand, grew up in a very nurturing and reinforcing home and environment, obviously will naturally have feelings that are far more welcoming and far more upbeat, because simply that's their. But regardless which one you are, the point that I want to make is, and that's of course the theme I want to address, is what controls or what dominates most in your life, lightness or darkness. I think it's a very apropos theme when it comes to Chanukah, which is the festival of lights. Because even if you're the former situation, growing up in an environment that has caused you to be very tentative and cautious and so on, non-trusting, that doesn't mean that you are destined and doomed the rest of your life to be that way. The first way we get control over our lives is by being honest and saying, yes, I feel that way, and what can I do about it? The worst possible thing you can do is to deny it and say, no, everything is cool. I've met people who've come to see me or for advice and so on, and initially, in asking, in probing and trying to ask some of these questions in a sensitive way, of course, because you don't want to ever, it's not about hurting anybody, it's about really being sensitive. And most people, because of pride and they're just their own sense of self-esteem, do not say that their lives are driven by fear. Very few people say, I'm a person that lives in fear. If a person says that, that means they probably have worked on themselves to some extent. They've come to that recognition. Most of us don't want to acknowledge such a statement because it's a very, initially, it can seem very demeaning and extremely, who wants to be around somebody that's driven by fear and by negative energy? And often people are not even aware how much fear and negative stuff is driving their life until push comes to shove. When you're living on a superficial level, you can walk the streets and go shopping and celebrate and do many things and not necessarily touch that place. When do these emotions come to the surface? When you're threatened, like anything. When suddenly you're faced in a challenging situation, like I said with the relationships. In relationships, it's very hard to mask because you're dealing with another person and that person senses something, and at some point, are you going to be open or you're not going to be open? So when you go shopping, you don't have to open. Some people maybe speak that way to everybody they meet. They share everything in their heart and soul. But usually when you go shopping or you meet somebody superficially or just on a very surface level, you're not threatened because they're not demanding anything of you. But when you're in a relationship, there are situations where you're vulnerable and there's another person you're looking for love. That person also wants love. So there's going to be a necessity to confront your own demons at some point. And when one doesn't, it's going to definitely have a detrimental effect on the relationship. And especially this is true between the spouses or boyfriend, girlfriend, or definitely parents and children as well. It's one thing when your baby is a newborn and they don't really talk back to you, but then a child grows older and they begin to see things and they begin to notice, and you can hide, but at some point, in your own home and your uncomfortable environment, things start emerging. Now, I don't see this as a bad thing. That's how we grow. But it's critical to recognize that darkness does play a role in our lives and not just dismiss it as if it's like, no big thing. And in many ways, you can say from a purely psychological point of view that a holiday like Chanukah actually forces us to confront our darkness. Even though it's true it's a festival of lights, and we honor it by lighting flames and lighting the menorah and the Chanukah licht and so on, But that came because of darkness. Remember, the story of Chanukah did not begin with light. It began with darkness. It began with a situation during the Second Temple that the Greco-Syrians, or the Greeks, as they're sometimes referred to, went to battle. And everybody, of course, Jerusalem is always the center of everybody's attention, from then till today, as Secretary of State Kerry in his last week of office reminds us. And everybody, Jerusalem seems to be the center of everybody's attention. So it was not just the case today that way, it's also thousands of years ago. First it was the Babylonians, then it was the Greeks, then it was the Persians, then it was the Persians and then the Greeks, and then of course the Romans, So the bottom line is Jerusalem is a very, a lightning rod, for lack of a better word, a place that attracts everybody's attention. That's another discussion. I've spoken about that many times. That's how it is with spiritual vortexes, where heaven meets earth. The words of King of Jacob when he fell asleep at the Temple Mount. That's Zeh Sha'ar Shamayim. This is the gate to heaven. So everybody wants to be the gatekeeper, And the Jews, of course, and then the Christians, and then the Muslims, and the fight is over this gate. So in this place in Jerusalem, a little more than 2,500 years ago, the Greeks entered Jerusalem, and as all those that preceded them and followed them, they went straight to the temple, and they defiled the temple, and they desecrated the temple. Now, interestingly, the Greeks were very different than other enemies of the Jewish people. They weren't interested in killing Jews. They were interested in killing the spirit of Jews, the soul. Like the Haman in the story of Purim was total genocide, just like the Nazis. Egypt wanted to destroy the Jews physically. In the case of the Greeks, as we say in the prayer that we say every day on Chanukah, it says, Lashkicham, they wanted to make us forget Torah Secha, your God's Torah. They wanted us, Lahavirim Chukir Tzanecha, they wanted us to wander away from your laws. The emphasis was on God's laws and on God's Torah. What does that mean? The Greeks were philosophers. The Greeks were moralists. They had a whole doctrine. They had no problem with the philosophical Torah. They had no problem with ethical and moral principles. They had a problem that it was sacred, that the Jews considered it holy, considered it godly, that it wasn't a man-made thing. It was more than human mind. They worshipped the human body and the human mind. And the Jews insisted that there's more to life than the human mind, because there's the God that creates the human mind and the human heart, and that the foundation of all morality and ethics is, as the United States came to discover, is in God we trust. And all men are created equal, and by the virtue of the Creator do we have inalienable rights. It's not a man-made right, because if it's man-made, man can give it to you, then man can take it from you. And if it's God-given, as the Bible puts it, and as the founding fathers of this country understood and appreciated, that nobody can take from you because no one gave it to you. It's a God-given gift. And that essentially undermines the whole history of monarchs and despots and dictators and people who controlled and monopolized authority, whether it was the church or whether it's other monarchs. And it was only till around 250 years ago the first institutionalized so-called recognition of the Bill of Rights and freedom, that every human being is equal in their pursuit of freedom and so on, and freedom of religion and freedom of speech and press, freedom of press and so on, was the United States. But the Greeks had no problem with certain principles, but to say that it's based on this bedrock, on this foundation of a divine element, Torah Secha, no problem. Torah, great, it's a doctrine, it's a philosophy. And mitzvahs that are divine, that was what they fought. The Levush Mordechai Yaffa was a great scholar, and he puts it this way, that Purim was the battle against the Jewish body, and Chanukah was the battle against the Jewish soul. So that's why Purim we celebrate with what? With meals, and sending food gifts, and charity, and all that comes with that. Chanukah we celebrate light. Light is a very different type of celebration. You could say once on Purim, you could also light flame candles. We do it before Shabbos and before every holiday, but the victory of Purim was not a victory of light per se. It was a victory of literally from genocide, from a Holocaust. Whereas Chanukah, even though there was a battle and there were casualties, but the battle was over a spiritual battle. It was who would dominate the spiritual perspective. And ultimately, that's why, even though there was a battle, there was a victory, as we say in the prayer, of the many fell to the few, and the ma'atim biyad, chazokim biyad ma'atim, the strong fell to the weak, and the weak prevailed over the strong, the few over the many, but we honor Chanukah through the flame, which seemingly initially seems to be almost an aside. The reason, technically, why we light flames is, as the Talmud says, because after the Greeks had defiled the temple, and there was no longer any oil, you needed pure olive oil in order to light the menorah, and all the pure olive oil seemed to have been defiled. So the miracle was they found one crucible, one little flask of oil that was untouched. And the second miracle was that it burned for 8 days, even though it only had enough to burn for 1 day. And why 8 days? Because it took 8 days to go and produce and press more pure olive oil. Okay. So, but the whole story of doing that was only a result that the Maccabees won their battle against the Greeks. Had they not won the battle, they wouldn't have been able to rededicate the temple, which is why it's called Chanukah, by the way. Chanukah is from the word dedication. And rededicate the temple and light the menorah. So lighting the menorah seems to be an aside, because they also were able to do other things. They were able to bring offerings again, and the temple was able to regain and reclaim its essentially its sanctity. So the question, of course, is, so why is the central mitzvah Chanukah light? And the answer I just gave before is because the battle was not over. They didn't want territory, the Greeks. They didn't want money. They didn't want to kill the Jews. They wanted their souls to not. They wanted that Jewish people should be philosophers and ethical people, but not based on anything sacred or anything divine. And that was the battle. So that's why essentially it was a war over light, and therefore we honor it through lighting flames. And when you think of it this way, and I talk about this many times, no one has ever seen the soul. However, we're told in the book of Proverbs, the soul of God, the flame of God is the soul of a human being. So basically, a flame is the closest approximation to what a soul looks like. It's the only thing in physical existence that we can see with our naked eyes that defies gravity. There are gas, like helium defies gravity, but you have to put it into a balloon to see it. Here you can look at a flame, and it's the only thing that defies gravity. It goes up instead of down. Very simple lesson in that. And that is because the soul is exactly the same thing. The soul is a transcendent force. Everything in this material world is subject to the laws of gravity. And I don't just mean the physical gravity, but materialism tends to draw us down. And the flame, the soul, is the only force that helps us look up and to beyond. So basically, if you think of it again in psychological terms, you could say the flame represents the hope, the optimism, all those sentiments I mentioned before that make a person feel up and uplifted. And the darkness are all the sentiments and feelings that make us feel despondent and down. So when you think of Chanukah in that way, you could say the whole holiday of Chanukah really is to celebrate the light that came after this darkness. So essentially, if you personalize that in our personal lives, and as you know, I always focus and emphasize that in this class, because I feel, and to me it's quite obvious, that the challenge in our generation, the challenge in our time, is not necessarily purely learning Torah knowledge. There are many good schools that teach you the literature of Torah and the scholarship part of it. And you have schools here in America and in Israel and all over the world that are thriving. But how many schools are teaching us the relevance of Judaism to our lives? That it shouldn't just be mechanical, it shouldn't just be by rote and something you do like a robot, robotically, but that it touches your soul and your heart and it's relevant to your personal issues. How many people would say, when I have a personal struggle in my life, I'll open up a Torah or I'll learn the laws of Chanukah and I'll find my answer? I don't think you'll find very many. Some will even say it's not. You won't even find those answers there. Some say it may be there, but I don't know how to find it. So what I focus on here is this point of what Moses said and wrote. What's written in the Torah, in the final book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, says that in your journey in life, you may, I'm paraphrasing, you may feel that Judaism, Torah, mitzvahs, may be distant from you. or across a wide sea, or in the heaven. So he says, I'm here to tell you, Moses says, Leba Shamayim here, it's not in heaven, and Lo Rechoki, it's not distant, Lema Ever Layam, it's not across any wide sea. Ki Karev Elecha Davar Ma'ed. This thing, this system that I'm presenting to you from God, this divine system, is Karev, means it's relevant to you. It's relevant to your life. It addresses the issues that you need to be able to not just survive in this world, but thrive, to be able to actualize yourself. Because, at the end of the day, using an analogy, we live in a dark world. We live in a dark world in the sense where it's like riding on dark roads. Imagine a dark road without headlights. Or imagine a road without a map, without a road map, or a GPS, or Waze today, whatever you want to call it. So what do you have? You have many roads, many twists and turns. But if you don't have lights, or you don't have a guide, you can really get yourself lost, or even furthermore, you can actually get yourself very damaged. So the Torah is called Torah Or. There you go, Chanukah, Or again. Or. Ner mitzvah, Torah Or. The mitzvah is called Ner, a flame, and Torah is called light. A flame is, of course, a smaller light. But they're both symbolic of light. So when you start looking, you'll find within the texts, and within Scripture, and within all the everything good?
I'm sorry?
Is everything fine?
Yeah, I slept 12 hours last night, but I'm yawning.
Some people get tired from sleeping,
Sorry.
Yeah. So you'll find references, constant references, to the theme of light, because it's not just a nice metaphor. It happens to be, captures the essence of what life is like. Here we live in a world where we don't know what tomorrow brings, what curveballs will be thrown to us. And when you don't know, it can be somewhat unsettling and disorienting. But imagine you have a light to shine, then you could see ahead. You could see, okay, here it's a dark road, but I have a light, a headlight, and I have a map which to follow. So that's why for the Jewish people, and the truth is this is true for the entire world, because the Torah was not just given for the Jews, it was given as a roadmap for everybody. That's why you have the moral ethical laws that are meant to serve as the basis for all ethics and all morality in the universe. What is it meant to be? It's meant to be literally like a life's operator's manual. Imagine you come home with a very complex machine, or even not a complex machine, just a machine, and you don't have an operator's manual. How will you figure out how to use this machine? Well, life is like a machine. Life is even more complex than any machine. Especially psychological and our personal emotional lives are complex. And we see it. We see our relationships are difficult. We see we have difficult sometimes dealing with our own inner challenges. Many of them I mentioned earlier, whether it's our fears, our inhibitions, our sexuality. And when it comes to anything really deeper, we have no clue. Who taught us how to be a healthy person? So if you have mazel, you grew up in a healthy home, that's obviously the best possible scenario, because we learn health not from a book, we learn it from experience. People that around us were healthy people, most likely you'll be a healthier person. Obviously there are exceptions and there are different circumstances. And then the opposite is also true, God forbid, that if you grow up around unhealthy people, most likely that's going to be your default. It doesn't mean that you're doomed and doesn't mean it's hopeless, it just means that's going to be your challenge. So when someone says, so what is the definition of a healthy person? It's a very trick question in a way, because if you don't know what health and what not health is, how could you really answer that question? Somebody that grew up in a toxic environment, that has been breathing toxic air for 30 years, and you ask them what's healthy, they're not going to be able to give you really an objective answer. So who can really say what's healthy? You have to really have a standard of what is health and what is not health. You have to see, like, for example, when they take an x-ray of someone's lungs, because there's a concern that say there's infection in the lungs, or so bronchitis, or pneumonia, or something like that. So what does the doctor always do? They put the x-ray of the lungs on a screen, an illuminated screen, right, a fluorescent screen. Next to it is they put a healthy set of lungs, so then you compare it. If you never saw a healthy set of lungs, you can be convinced that unhealthy is healthy. So you need to have always a backdrop, a standard by which to compare. Same is true emotionally and psychologically. Many of us, if someone to ask you, can you define to me what a healthy psychological emotional person is like? If you've never seen it, you won't be able to answer. All you can answer, you can say, I know what I've seen in my life, but I don't know what's healthy, what's not healthy. Now, Torah, at its best, gives us exactly that type of picture. What does it mean to be a healthy human being? Healthy spiritually, healthy emotionally, healthy psychologically. Now, obviously, many of us can say things like, someone with a good self-esteem, but not arrogant, someone with a sense of humility, someone that's a happy person, that exudes positive energy. I think most of us would agree those are signs of health. But obviously those are the basics, but there's a lot more to it than that. Often you'll see the difference between a healthy person and an unhealthy person when it comes to conflict. When there's a disagreement, how do you react? A healthy person acts very differently than an unhealthy person. A healthy person will not be defensive, will not attack because he or she is attacked, because there's a sense of self, and you know how to step aside from personally and pettiness and other stuff like that. So that's a good sign. Conflict is always a good way to figure out how people deal with conflict. Is usually guaranteed to tell you much about that person. And the same thing with other things in life. Different pressures, tension, crisis. All these things bring out the best in us or the worst in us. And so when it comes to Chanukah and Torah in general, it's meant to be a backdrop that teaches us what does it mean to be the healthy person. So then it makes total sense that Chanukah is not just some celebration commemorating something that happened thousands of years ago. It's commemorating something that's happening right now, which is your battle with your darkness and how you deal with that battle and who will prevail. So it's an excellent opportunity to address the questions I asked at the outset here, which is what defines your life? What defines your life? Now, it's very sad, I've heard it too many times for my comfort zone at least, I'm not comfortable to hear. When someone tells you, I have to be honest with you, in answering your question of what dominates my time and energy, yes, most of it is fears and fighting demons. The only difference is sometimes they're very overt and very loud, and they really literally paralyze my life, and sometimes they're a little quieter. But at the end of the day, most of my energy, I'm exhausted from having to fight the people who are critical of me, to fight my mother, my mother-in-law, my brother, my sister, my workers, my co-workers. Often it is a list like that, a long list, where people of many different persuasions, many different parts of a person's life are like you always feel, people have told me, expression, I feel I'm under attack. I always feel that I'm in a war zone. And it's not always exaggerated. Sometimes they're accurately conveying what they feel. Sometimes it is imagined demons, and sometimes they're real. But the bottom line is, what difference does it make to a person when they think they have demons, whether it's real or imagined? It may make a difference to someone else. At the end of the day, if you're convinced you have a demon, the bottom line is it's affecting a person. So this is a challenging situation, obviously. And above all, even though I'm painting, just to make the point, I'm using an extreme example, I would say most people are not necessarily completely consumed by demons. I would say that most people have demons in their lives and they have their fears, but it's not complete. That's why we have moments of respite where we have times where we feel better. People even who have difficult lives will say certain days are really good and they work well. Now, as we all know, psychological stuff also affects our physical beings. So this isn't just an emotional psychological discussion, it also affects our physical health. Fact of the matter is, when a person is depressed or anxious, there's psychosomatic effects that it has on the being. There's no question about that. It's proven today that when a person, God forbid, is in a hospital and they have guests and visitors and family and gifts and people constantly encouraging them and building their strength and so on, literally strengthens their immune system. And when you have people who are lying in a bed, sadly, alone, no visitors and no guests, and nothing that's giving them encouragement, it weakens the fight inside of you. Now, doctors have not yet exactly quantified what exactly happens, chemicals and so on, but it's very clear that chemicals are affected by our attitudes and our positive energy, affects even the physical human being. Sarna was one that made it very famous about backache, and back pain is a direct result of psychological anxiety and stuff like that. But today it's pretty common. The mind-body soul medicine ideas. And I'm not going into quack medicine where some people go to the extremes. Even in a very mainstream approach, there's no question there's effects. I'll just remember a story I shared a number of times. I remember when I was a teenager, so I suffered from allergies. You know, they were not life-threatening, but they were allergies. It was called hay fever, which was really, there was ragweed, which was during the second half of August, and September was miserable. I don't know if you've ever had it, but you know it is. Your nose runs, your throat tickles, it's miserable. And I remember one summer I had this like almost an asthmatic attack. So I went to the doctor. There was a very famous allergist. His name was Dr. Redner at the time, and he gave me all these tests, these scratch tests, and it blew up. I remember the dust and the ragweed blew up and I had a severe reaction right there in his office. Anyway, so I had such a severe reaction, he had to give me a shot of something. He gave me a shot of, and suddenly it all cleared up. Now, I don't know if you know this, but those that have suffered from allergies, the most beautiful summer days are the most miserable days because the breeze, all that carries the pollen. And so what everybody's enjoying, you're miserable. And again, it's the nose running and it's the throat tickling and the sneezing and all that. Basically, your plumbing up here is all messed up. So he gave me the shot. I asked him, what shot was that? I cleared everything up. I felt like I was in heaven. Suddenly in the middle of a beautiful summer day. So he said to me, this is called adrenaline. Adrenaline. So I knew what adrenaline was. I said, adrenaline? You mean the adrenaline like it happens when you're excited and enthusiastic and running? Adrenaline. He said, yeah. So I said, so what do you give me all these tests? Just give me some adrenaline. Every time I have a bad allergy, I'll just inject myself with adrenaline. He says, no, you'll build up immunity to it, and you'll need more and more, and it can be very dangerous. So adrenaline is good, he says, when you need it, not every day. So then I asked him something which really struck me at the moment. Every Sunday, for some reason, no matter what, even during the allergy season, I never really felt I had allergies. So I used to always think I was so busy, because Sunday was a very heavy day of work for me, because some of you may know, I was what's called a chayzer and a maniach of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which meant on Shabbos we would memorize hours and hours of the Rebbe's talks, and then I had the responsibility of writing it down. So Sunday was the big day of getting it all from the mind on paper. And I was so busy and so consumed with it, I always thought I didn't even notice that my nose is running. But then I asked him, said, is it possible that when you're really in a very intense mode, that your natural adrenaline starts flowing, and therefore the allergies go away? So he said, absolutely. And I remember he told me, he said, look on Broadway, he says, actors, opera singers, ballet dancers, pianists. They can perform for 3 or 4 hours and you'll never see them yawn, nor you'll see them sneeze. How is that possible? He says a sneeze and a yawn are natural body reactions. He says because when they're in that place, the adrenaline is so high that they have like a superhuman control over their bodies. So that's why you could set your mind, I want to wake up 5:30 in the morning, better than any alarm clock. You'll wake up right on the dot. So where do we have such control? It's because the mind releases a chemical that actually physically changes who you are. Now, you can't keep that up all the time because it's just not possible, but he says there's no question. If you're doing that intense work, I have no doubt it's just like these opera singers or pianists and so on, concert pianists, that you just have this almost superhuman control. And then, of course, when the intensity is gone, it comes back. So it was like, to me, I always remembered that. I said, it's amazing because you could develop, based on that, a whole healthy regimen of that if people really were excited about their lives, maybe a lot of illnesses would be conquered. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting a miracle that a person will never have a cold and never have this, but how much of our own negative emotional state of mind is affecting our health? And how much when we are feeling that type of focus and that type of passion, that's, I think, also a good word, passion. Not a life of lethargy, of fatigue. How much actually would it affect our physical beings? So to me, this whole discussion about light and dark and Chanukah is not just a psychological, emotional one. It actually impacts literally our own health and our own state of mind. There's no doubt There's no doubt, I've seen it myself, so many different scenarios, that when a person does have that type of focus, and they wake up in the morning excited to jump out of bed, and they wake up with that type of passion about things, that is the best preemptive medicine in life. There's no question, hands down. Now again, I'm not talking about there are things that happen even no matter what kind of mood you're in, But the fact of the matter is what we're in control of, that's one of the things that we're most control of, the ability to set our minds to something that is positive. That positive energy flows through your whole body and has to have an impact on every part of who you are. And when you don't have that, it's like that hospital patient who does not have positive energy to help him fight, him or her fight whatever it is they're fighting. So now when you look at, so let's now go back to this theme. So the fact of the matter is most of us don't like the word victims, but we are often victims of circumstances. And I'll spell out what that means. It means that who you are right now is essentially a default state based on a lot of things that are circumstances that have happened to you. And as a result, we become like a product of those circumstances. Very few people feel that I can just do whatever I want. Very few people feel that way. And the reason for that is because we have family to deal with. We have work, employer or employees. We have expectations from different places coming ours. We're not neutral. We're an environment that has demands on us. Now, I'm not suggesting all those demands are bad. Some of them may be very healthy demands. You're a mature adult, make a living. You have to support a family. That's not a bad thing to be able to support others and so on. But many of those demands essentially take away the control of our lives. So essentially we're adults, but when it comes down to it, can you just do whatever you want? If you do whatever you want, you may end up hurting people, including yourself. So we are basically a product of things that have happened to us. Firstly, let's start with the most obvious things, the home we grew up in and the community we grew up in. If you grew up in a very intense Jewish community, there's no question, there's a lot of pressure from that. To the point it's even hard to even measure how much pressure there is. Because nobody wants to suddenly stand out or break away and so on. So by the time you become a teenager or an adult, and you're, so to speak, trying to make your own decisions, most of your decisions were made for you already. What kind of school you're going to go to, what are the religious standards in your life and community. Now you have your own family and children, what should you do? Send your children to a different school? Just to give some basic challenges that everybody has. And the list goes on. The list goes on. And at some point, some people may not even feel they're not in control of their lives, but then comes a point you suddenly realize, something, I don't know how much control do I have? So many of us, our attitude to that is, okay, resignation. Too bad. That's my life. I'll try to make the best of it. And what can we say? Just survive. Because we're already in obligations and we need to pay bills and we have people we're responsible to, it becomes difficult to just step back and say, okay, let's stop the whole thing and let's reboot the machine and start from scratch. That's almost an impossibility. So we're left with really two options only. Either just accept your miserable lot and or do things that will just break away and end up hurting everything. What third option is there? Well, there is a third option. The third option is becoming a healthy person who knows how to make choices and decisions and knows how to regain control over their lives. This doesn't mean the whole building has to go burn. You don't have to burn down the whole building and the whole structure that you grew up with in order to achieve that. And Chanukah offers us a game plan, a blueprint for this. Because it comes from a state of darkness, as I said, and then introduces light. So the first thing, as I said, is also you have to assess what your life is like. What controls your life right now? Is it positive stuff or negative stuff? And it's either or. To say both is true, but one is always more dominant than the other. We know today, we don't know the amount of people, we don't know the amount of money, but it's in the $1 trillion industry called therapy. You've heard this word, right? Everybody's heard this word today. A few hundred years ago, no one knew what it was. Our grandparents were not very happy with the concept of therapy. But today, therapy has become more popular, I guess. Now, what is therapy exactly? No one really has a full answer, but it seems to be some type of environment where people go to speak to someone to try to either get advice, objectivity, or maybe just have someone to listen to. At best, it's perhaps someone that is like a practitioner of psychological, emotional health, just like a physical doctor, helps us work things through, and I'm not going to suggest it hasn't helped people. But probably more bad therapists than good therapists in the world, which is already more darkness than light right there. So not everybody that calls himself a therapist is necessarily a good therapist. There are a lot of people who are therapists who are who need therapy more than the clients that they have. And maybe that's one of the ways they get therapy is by being therapists. I'm not saying that's bad either, because sometimes some people who've been hurt know how to be sensitive and empathize with others. Now, how do you determine what's a good therapist or not? Sometimes it's trial and error, because for some people, someone may work well. For someone else, it may not work that well. One thing is sure, that this is a very dominant industry because there's a lot of misery in the world. Now, it's ironic that as we become more prosperous, and we become more comfortable, and we become more wealthy, and we have more options, the standard of living has gone up dramatically. In direct proportion to that, therapy has also gone up. Now, I think it's pretty obvious the explanation for that, because when you turn the clock back 100 years ago, and let's talk at least for the Jewish people, when you're running from Nazis, or you're running from communists, or you're running from Cossacks, or from an Inquisition, or from Crusaders, and all the persecution, frankly, you don't have the luxury to sit for an hour or two with a therapist to talk about your problems. And secondly, your issues and values are very crystallized when you have to fight for them. So the ironic byproduct of comfort is the way the Torah puts it very succinctly, Vayishman Yeshurim Vayivot, that when Yeshurim, which is another name for Israel, becomes fat, becomes prosperous, Vayivot, they begin to complain, they begin to rebel. So the irony is that when life was far less comfortable, people were far more focused. And today, because of the luxury and because of the freedom and the prosperity, at least physically, we become very we take it for granted. Apathy is a direct outgrowth of prosperity. It's always the rule, which is sad, but that's how it is. Because comfort zones do not bode well for healthy growth. When you're comfortable, why move? Hey. So then, imagine then growing up in a home or an environment that I mentioned before that has trained you to be a certain way. So now you're in your comfort zone. Why would you want to break away from it? And it's very difficult to do so. So I'm not suggesting we have to turn the clock back and try to become miserable again and live in lives that are very difficult, and that will like so-called wake up our souls again. But what do we do? How do you fight the prosperity of our lives and the comfort and get that motivation that only comes when you're not comfortable? So the answer is that you have to be spiritually uncomfortable, that you have to feel that life is not really working that well. That's why you'll see that most people go for help when things aren't working. You know, when there's a loss, when there's a death, when there's a major shift in a trauma, or major shift in a person's life. So Chanukah teaches us that you don't have to necessarily hit rock bottom before you wake up, so to speak. That there is a way, by being honest with yourself. You know, every night, there's one of the expressions one of the Hasidic Rebbe says, you have to listen to what the flames tell us. They tell us a story. And if you really took Chanukah to heart in a very personal way, that story can help a person deal with every particular challenge. So let's talk about a few of the stories that these flames tell us in context of what I've been saying till now. The first thing they tell us is that you have to recognize the role of darkness in your life and how much is it really affecting you. Like, for example, when it comes to decisions, are you trapped in indecisiveness and the ability without the ability to make a decision? And the reason why is that the case? Is it due to fear? Is it just due to taking little risks, trying to be safe and stuff like that? This is very important to determine that, because if you don't have an answer to that question, you will never move from your life, because you can convince yourself everything is cool, everything is fine. So it's important to know the role, as I said earlier, the role of darkness in your life. And darkness takes whatever shape, whether it's fears, inhibitions, all the Like you wake up in the morning. Are you happy when you wake up in the morning, usually? Some people tell me they can't stand waking up. They wake up, but they really sometimes would rather just sleep more because life isn't so pleasant. Sleep is some form of escape. That's a pretty good indicator. How many days you wake up, 7 days in the week? How many of those days would you say in the last month do you feel good when you wake up? The moment you wake up, before you start thinking about things. Just and now of course people will say it depends. If I have very big debts and big responsibilities and I'm all that, it's not going to be such a great day, But I would say taking into account, averaging it out. These are the indicators that help you. And it's not here, the point here is not to criticize yourself and say this is good or bad. It's not a right or wrong answer. It's about really just assessing the role of darkness in your life. You need to know where you stand. To me, these are very tremendous indicators because the more positive stuff you have, obviously you have what to work with. The more negative stuff, so even if someone says something to you inspiring, a little time passes, you're going to gravitate back to your status quo state, which is back to your comfort zone. And everybody's got their comfort zone. Don't ever kid yourself. Everyone is comfortable in a certain place. I should qualify that and say that comfort zones don't always mean it's a comfortable place to be. It's just that it became your place. Like some people tell me, I'm much more comfortable when I'm being hurt by somebody, because that's what I'm used to, than not. That's also a comfort zone, because you're used to it. And the unknown evil is sometimes harder to deal with than the known evil, which is why many people stay in very abusive and very unhealthy situations, because they at least know it. They're familiar with it. They're familiar. They're going to come home. They know they're coming to an unhealthy environment, but that's what they know. Whereas another place is very threatening because who knows what's going to come. As I said, the known evil is for many better than the unknown evil. Is it true or not? Obviously, it's not true, but that's what people think it is, and that's another trap. So it's vital to understand this question because to use the expression from the prophet, he says that there's a state where people are somim cheshech la'er. They consider darkness to be light. They consider the bitter to be sweet. If you've read 1984 by Orwell, so there's this whole, what is it called? The language they use, group think or something like that. Where group think, it's all conformity, herd mentality, and essentially they indoctrinate children and adults with these lines: war is peace, peace is war, love is hate, hate is love. Can you imagine a person who decides that love is hate and that war is peace? And at some point you convince yourself that's the truth. So it's critical to know whether your perspectives are healthy ones. Now that's something that only you can challenge yourself by going to somebody who you trust or respect and say, you know what, I'm going to give you my perspective on a few things. I want to know whether you agree with them or not. And if you speak to someone that's healthy and someone they tell you, 1 second, what you're calling comfortable is actually very toxic. What you're calling healthy is actually very unhealthy. If you're not ready for such a conversation, it's going to be very difficult to grow. Because what we usually do is we minimize our situation simply to be able to survive. Baal Shem Tov puts it this way. There's a verse in the Torah that says, V'anochi haster es panai b'yemahu. So it says twice that I, God, concealed my face in that day, on that day. So the question is, what is this double haster aster? What's this double concealment? So the Baal Shem Tov puts it this way. He says there's two types of darkness. There's a darkness that you know is dark, night outside right now, and in the morning the dawn will break, so we know it's dark. Tomorrow's going to be a new day, new light. The sun will rise again. But then there's a aster, that the darkness conceals the hester, the darkness. The darkness conceals that it's dark, so you convince yourself, hey, it's not dark, it's pretty light here. That is always the hardest thing to deal with, because you don't even think there's a problem. I'm sure you've met people, I hope you yourself have not been in this situation, where they really convinced they don't have a problem. They have a very serious problem. They don't even know they have a problem. They don't even know that they don't know. Let's put it that way. So at least if you know you don't know, it's the beginning of some hope. Now, how to deal with that is a whole other story. And I don't know if you should come with a battering ram and how do you wring somebody's neck who you see is completely off base. I don't know if that's our job. It comes down to who you are and what relationship you have with that person and whether it will help even. But I'm not from the believers that you have to go force. You can't help someone who doesn't want to help themselves. That's why if somebody's not willing to do something to go save them, obviously if they're in danger and life-threatening, you try to do whatever you can. But beyond that, you can't help someone if they're not ready to help themselves. So the first step is you have to assess. That's the first story of the flames. It's actually not even a story of flames, it's a story of darkness. That's why Chanukah's story doesn't begin with light, it begins with darkness. That there is a state where we all will be defiled, just like the Greeks defiled the temple. We all have our inner spiritual temple, and there will be a point where we will lose our innocence, and there will be some form of desecration or some form of defilement. And then the question is, what are you going to do? Are you going to convince yourself that it's not desecrated, everything is good? Or are you going to say, you know what, it's not good, and I need to find a crucible of pure oil? Now, you know, the commentaries and the scholars all ask the question, you can light a menorah technically with the oil that's not pure. At least it's burning. But it's not what's called the healthy type of oil. You know, there's a story they tell early in the 40s. So there was a debate among the Board of Jewish Education. So then, Jewish education in America was not exactly what it was today, what it is today. So they had teachers who were not Shomer Shabbos teaching children about Shabbos and kosher and so on. So one of the Rebbes said to the Board of Education, you know, you can't have teachers teaching people about Shabbos that don't keep Shabbos themselves, at least publicly. So one of the educators said, one of the board said, 1 second, Rebbe. You know, when there's a burning building, you don't really care whether it's clean water or dirty water that you pour on the building. You just got to put the fire out. So it's true, the building is, ignorance is the fire. It's true, this may not be the cleanest water, this teacher, but at least it's putting out the fire of ignorance. And the Rebbe responded and said, that's true if it's clean and dirty water. But what happens if it's kerosene? When you teach a child, and the child sees that the teacher is not doing what they're teaching, that too is a lesson. That's not dirty water, that's kerosene, that's fire. You're putting fuel on the fire, because the child learns that you don't have to do what you learn. Don't teach the child about Shabbos, better than teaching the child about Shabbos and then desecrating Shabbos in front of the child. Because then you're teaching the child that you don't have to be what you're taught. Now everybody makes mistakes. That's not the point. The point is whether you're doing it publicly and teaching someone don't steal, and the person who taught you is the biggest thief, for example. That's not dirty water. That's kerosene. So it's a very interesting insight. In other words, the point of the matter is, as one of the statements I always repeat is, everybody has flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of them. You know, because once you make a philosophy, go deal with a philosophy. Now it's a whole philosophy of flaws. So the first thing is you have to realize what is dark and what is light. You must know that answer. You can't start saying this type of ambiguity, everything is light, it depends which perspective you're looking at. You know, it's called moral relativism, which we're suffering from a lot today, especially lately you see this. That the same people who dictate so-called being open-minded are the least open-minded on earth. You know, without going into the details. But the point is that the first thing is Chanukah teaches us there's dark, there's light. Let's get that clear. And yes, the Jewish people were not interested in using olive oil that was not pure. You're teaching children. You're teaching, when you're, for example, young, newborn children, you don't use dirty water, and you don't use dirty diapers, and you don't use anything that's unclean, even though technically may not put them in danger because they're pure. And pure things need pure olive oil. So the first lesson is there's purity and there's impurity. And the Greeks defiled the temple, and the Jews were looking for some miracle. And they found it. What's the lesson in that? The lesson in that is, and this is the second story that the flames tell us, that if you dig deep enough, there's always a pure flask of olive oil inside every one of us. We all have a pilot flame. In the words of the King Solomon, Ani yeshena, but libi er. I may be asleep, but my heart is awake. So even though on a conscious level, sometimes you don't see a person's flame and a person's light or a person's song, but it's in there. To use Oliver Wendell Holmes' tragic poem called The Voiceless, he's alas, alas to those who die with their song still inside them. Not a pleasant thing to hear. It means everybody has a song inside them, and unfortunately many people die with that song still unsung. Michelangelo put it that when they asked him how he carves those beautiful angels in the marble, he says, I see the angel trapped in the marble, and I carved and set her free. I know I'm using non-Torah sources, but essentially this is a Torah, fundamental Torah thought, which is there's no such thing as lost, there's no such thing as original sin, there's no such thing as a devil is more powerful than God. Things can go into concealment. The good in us, our spiritual purity, and the deepest, the most beautiful components within us may be undercover, but they never disappear. And Chanukah teaches that outright, that if you look deep enough, you will find that flask. Not just they found it there in the temple, I'm talking about the personal psychological purity within. But you have to look with eyes like that. You have to look with positive eyes. You will always see the people who can see the light inside themselves are able to help others see the light. People who see themselves as horrible will teach you that you're also horrible. It's a rule. I came to realize this at some point in my own educational upbringing, where I realized that the people who had very low self-image, they basically teaching you to have low self-image. And it's wise to stay away from them because they're not doing any good for you. People who have a very positive self-image, they see themselves as light, then you see yourself also that way. People who like themselves help you like yourself as well. I don't mean like in a selfish way or egotistic way. People who hate themselves teach hate. So it's very critical to realize that we all have a real beautiful angel, a song, many songs, and flowers within us. But they are undercover at times. And when we do things that are not beautiful, they obviously hide and conceal that part of us. And Chanukah's lesson is very clear. It's there. It's there, you just have to find it. Now the question is, once you find it, what happens next? So there comes the next story of Chanukah, the next story of the flames of Chanukah, the story they tell us. And that is that even though it may be only a little flask and it can only burn for a little moment, for one day, it has the power to burn for 8. 8 days is like a whole week plus a day. So it's like the whole cycle of life and more. And as the Rashba and others explain, the number 8 is the number of transcendence. 7 is the structure, the cycle of 7 days of the week, the 7 emotions, the 7 years of the sabbatical, the many, many 7s in life. But the 8 is a sign of transcendence. So that's the next lesson, that even though you may think it's just a very little pilot flame, but that pilot flame has power. It has a power to affect your entire life and affect it in a real way. So when you think about it from that perspective, what do you get? You get that question is, so who's the real you? Are you light or are you darkness? Now sometimes your life circumstances can make you feel you're living in the darkness, but that doesn't make you less light. It just means you've been surrounded by darkness. I always point out, the Jewish people have suffered a lot, but they never became sufferers. They never allowed themselves to be defined by their suffering, because that is when you lose your soul. You can suffer. We all will go through challenges in life. But the question is whether you personalize it. Many people, if something happens bad to them, they say, I know I deserved it. I'm a bad person, that's why bad. As soon as you hear that, you know there's something really screwed up, something distorted. A person that's healthy never says that. They'll say something bad happened. But that doesn't make me bad, and it doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. It means something bad happened to me, and I have to figure out what to do with it. That's how healthy people think. That's how leaders think. Victims always think that I'm at fault in some way, or I couldn't control it, or if this happened, that happened, blaming others at times. A healthy person looks at a situation and never personalizes it. It's not me. It happened to me, and I have to deal with it. So the same thing is here, that ultimately the message of Chanukah is a festival of light, that light is our natural state. Now, if you say, how do we know? Maybe that's not the case. If you're a Talmudic scholar, you'll know that there's a disagreement between Shammai and Hillel about this very question, where Shammai says it's more pleasant for a person not to be born than to be born. And Hillel says that it's more pleasant for a person to be born than not to be born. Disagreement. Now, usually the ruling is according to Hillel. In this case, actually, the ruling is according to Shammai. That's actually more pleasant to not be in this world than to be in this world. So, of course, the obvious question is, so why are we here? Why are we born? And the answer is a very beautiful one. We're not here because to be pleasant. This is not a vacation village. We're here, it's more, maybe not as pleasant to be in this earth than it is to be in heaven. Because remember, in heaven, there's no illness, there's no financial issues, there's no death, there's no pain. So of course it's more pleasant. But you know what it is? But it's not as purposeful. The purpose of life is fulfilled here. God's purpose is fulfilled where there are the challenges of health and parnasa and livelihood and all the challenges that we live in this hostile world, in a world of darkness. In Gan Eden, in heaven, there's no darkness. It's a place of light all day and all night. Here, there is darkness. But the purpose is you have the power to illuminate that darkness. That's the key difference. So yes, the ruling is like Shammai, but it's not about pleasantness. So the fact that we live in a dark world, however, doesn't mean that we're dark. Now, as I said, what's the most obvious proof? Look at our children. You ever see a dark child being born? You know any child that's born in a bad mood? Now, I'm not talking about, God forbid, some chemical imbalance or an anomaly or something that's an aberration due to whatever circumstances. A healthy child born is a child that it carries joy, and they bring joy to this world, and they are themselves joyous. Think to yourself, when's the first time a child starts feeling non-joy? When they see their parents are not happy. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about taking away a candy or not giving a child and they'll cry. We all know that's superficial and that they cry 1 second, the next second they're happy. I'm not talking about that type of. But there's no such thing as a depressed child. There's no such thing as a despondent child. All those emotions I described earlier, what defines you, don't exist. When you were a young child, you didn't have any of them. There's no such thing as a hopeless child. Children are full of hope, full of imagination, full of enchantment, full of possibilities. When children start losing that, when parents and adults tell them, you can't have this, you can't have that. I'm not talking about not spoiling them. I'm talking about that you start telling them, don't dream so much. Or they get disappointed because they see that people disappoint them. But from a child's point of view, everything's possible. They expect love, and they will give love unless they're told otherwise. Now that's the tragedy. When a child is hurt, or a child gets betrayed or abandoned, the child starts slowly changing their attitude. That's when the child turns into, unfortunately, a broken adult, to put it in blunt terms. But a natural child, is like freshly fallen snow. It's like a song. A child is a song. And then that song, as I said before with Michelangelo, gets trapped in the marble and in the concrete and other forces of life. And it goes undercover to the point that many forget that they have a song, and many don't even feel they can ever sing that song because whatever reason it was beat out of them. I mean, how many of us feel that I once had that idealism, everything was possible, and then I realized I'm not going to get it, and then disappointments, and then heartbreaks, and broken promises, and shattered dreams, and so on. I don't want to depress anyone, but that's what happens. And then you change your attitude. That change of attitude is when things get really bad. If you maintain and know there's always that flame inside of you, and you maintain that childish spirit, and say, all this is not me, it's what happens in life, then you maintain that attitude. That's a healthy person. But many of us give in, and we suddenly become a product of what we're told. And we begin to believe it all. And we believe that we may not deserve it, or we may never gain the things we once dreamed possible. So comes Chanukah and says, it's all wrong. Light is your natural state. And not only that, not only is light your natural state, you have the power to actually dispel darkness and to illuminate darkness. I mean, another yet lesson and story the flame tells us is that when you look at a flame, it naturally, without any effort, dispels darkness. It's not like fire and water. Fire and water, enough fire can evaporate large bodies of water. Enough water can extinguish the greatest fires. Water, light, and darkness are not like that. A little light, just a little, will naturally dispel darkness. You may need a lot more light for a very dark room or a large room, but the area where the light shines, darkness is no match for light. That means that light is naturally more powerful. So then if darkness dominates your life, listen to this, that means it's only because you don't have light. Because darkness is only the absence of light. That's what it means. It means if you had light, you wouldn't have this darkness. It will naturally dominate. But many of us don't know that secret. We think, I live in a dark place, and I'm doomed there. But the fact is, darkness is just the absence of light. Its power is the power you feed it. So imagine having an enemy that's not really that strong, but the enemy convinced you that it's strong. And your psychological state of mind is such you think that your state of being, your life, is weak. And in truth, you find out later, the enemy was nothing. It was an illusion. Can you imagine how sad that is? Well, that's the next message of Chanukah, that darkness is not a match for light. And because you have light, and if you let it shine, it will dominate, which is very practical. It means simply this. No matter how kind of mood you're in, no matter how bad your mood is, commit to do something that is bright and illuminating. Either volunteer and help somebody, go study something, commit to whatever it is, something that's light. And you'll see that automatically it's going to have an effect on the rest of you. Of course, people say, well, I'm in such a bad mood and I feel so dark, I can't even do that. Well, there's no excuse for that. So force yourself. Just like you force yourself to exercise, you force yourself to eat, you have to force yourself. So force yourself against your own will to do something that's light, that brings light, that exudes light, that illuminates. And you'll see automatically darker things in your life will become less. But you have to consistently do this, obviously. If you do it for one moment, it's not going to solve the problem. Now, it's going to be difficult because, again, our comfort zones and our routines and our habits are very strong, and it's very hard to change things, Go try to teach a child to start brushing their teeth once they're a teenager. We have to make these routines, ingrain them when we're very young. It's hard to assume a new habit because we already have our life schedule and we do things automatically and things don't fit in. There's nowhere to fit it in. But that, again, is up to us. It's a matter of just doing it. You start doing it, you do it around 18 times, they say, and then it starts becoming slowly a habit. So yeah, the first times are going to be hard, like any type of exercise. But if you're talking about life is on the line. Chanukah. If we have families and children, one of the best things you can do, besides, of course, giving gifts, and Chanukah gelt, and there's lighting the candles, and the latkes, and the parties. I didn't mention the donuts, of course, and whatever else is on the menu. But there's another thing you can do. To talk to your children in the morning. They wake up in the morning. There's a Chanukah today, and the lesson of Chanukah, even though the flames are lit in the evening, is that we are all walking menorahs. We're walking flames. And find ways to convey that to your children. So firstly, the children themselves will be pretty interesting if you're able to do that in a creative way. And it'll come back to you because you have to find the words for it. So it maybe brings out the best in you to think in those terms. And then the question is, how do we act in it? Very simple. You do things that illuminate, that warm. A flame is a very clear thing. It illuminates things. It brings light. And it warms the environment. So imagine if you felt that way. You teach your children that you are natural illuminators and natural warmers. That you're able to bring warmth to other people. You're able to make people feel good. You're able to bring clarity, which is light, to other people. This is how we have to think. Even if we're not in the mood, or even though we may not think we're there, you have to sometimes fake it until you make it. Now, you could say, is this a fake? It's not a fake. The point is that you are actually there, but you don't know it yet. That's why you have to act. That's why behavioral change actually can lead to emotional and cognitive and ultimately revealing that which you're really made of. So that's yet another lesson of Chanukah. So this type of holding on to these values that we cherish and recognizing that we actually are agents of light and actually walking menorahs is a critical mindset change. Now you may say, I don't feel that way. But since when are your feelings deciding that matters? Our feelings, as I said, are shaped by our lives and our communities and our families. So I wouldn't give so much credence to our feelings exactly. And especially what I'm suggesting is not doing something that goes against what we want to be. We want to be that. They always say, are you going to live up to who you think you are, or are you going to live up to who you want to be? There's a very big difference between the two. Let's say when President Nixon resigned from office in 74, Watergate. So Kissinger writes in his memoirs, I think, that when Nixon was walking through the hall to go sign the resignation papers, so he came to this portrait in the White House lobby there, or whatever, one of the rooms, where there's this big portrait of JFK, Kennedy, like in this pensive mode where he's sitting on a chair and he said to the painting, he says, they love you because you remind them of who they want to be, and they hate me because I remind them of who they are. Now we don't know what JFK would have turned out to be. He became Camelot. He was assassinated, so it's always Achri Meis Kadeshim, as they say, But and so he became a symbol of youth and vigor and hope and so on. We know about another side to him too, which they talk less about. And they say he could have been a good match for Clinton and Trump and everybody else in that context. But that's another discussion here. That was no comment on the politics of our time. I just said that as an aside. So yes, there's 2 parts in us. There's who we think we are, and there's who we can be. You want to be around people. You want to be around models and role models and standards that expect the most of you, not the least from you. Now, it may make you a little uncomfortable, but that's what you want. Who doesn't want that? You want people who tell you you're perfect already, or you want people who tell you how you can really become much greater than you can imagine. That's what a good coach is like. They know how to kick you in the pants, but in a loving and kind way. And that's essentially what every holiday is, including Chanukah. It teaches us what we are capable of becoming, not trying to validate what you are. Even though some of us need that, and I'm not saying that times we do need the validation, we need the encouragement and just simply saying, you're fine. I got that, I'm not denying that. But you don't want it to stop there. Which is why every night of Chanukah, as much light as one night brings, the next light you light yet another flame, Mailan B'Kodesh. We never diminish, and we don't even stay in the same level. You have to always grow, because we're capable of growing. So if someone says to you, as much as you've achieved, you can achieve more, that's not a bad statement. That's saying that you have more power in you, they have more potential in you. And yet another lesson. And you see, if you take them all together, they all bring down one thing, that you are much greater than you think you are. Or as one of the Balatani, the Rosh Hashanah of Liadi said, that a person has to know how small they are and how great they can become. So obviously we need to have a certain humility and know where we are, but you have to also know how great you can become. And if you don't know how great you can become, you're really basically doing yourself the biggest disservice. Because if you don't believe in yourself, who's going to believe in you? So Chanukah is a tool, an instrument, you could say a teacher, a living teacher, teaching us of the light that we are capable of being, and the greatness we are able to become, and grow toward that. And it's that type of voice that you want in your life, because we have enough dissenters, enough what's another word for dissenter? Naysayers. Enough people that are telling us, don't get your hopes up, don't get so excited. I've been there, throwing cold water on your enthusiasm. The saddest thing when I hear sometimes adults tell me, I remember when I came home from school, I was 7, 8 years old, I ran home, I was so excited about something. And my father told me, don't get so excited, blah, 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 blah. For a child, that's like death, that's like murdering a child. Not physically, but you're like taking what a child's excitement is all about. And I remember my son came, and I remember that line always, and I remember my son came home once, and he said to me, he doesn't even remember, I remember. Now he's an adult, officially. And he said to me, I remember he said, I heard something really very nice today. What was it? He said to me, you were born an original, don't become a copy. And his excitement made me excited, and I got more excited, and he got excited. It was great. We had a great, exciting moment. Now he forgot about it, and I still live with it. How do you like that? That's the Veheshiv Levavis Albonim. In Malachi, the prophet says that the heart of the parents will return through their children. So I guess children is like a second chance we all get to get back. So instead of trying to make children like us, maybe we should try to let them make us like them. In technology, a iPhone 7 or 6 is better than an iPhone 5, and an Android, what version they up to, whatever it is better than the lower version. I think when it comes,
the one that catches on fire.
Oh, the one that's that.
Yeah.
Okay, but they'll fix that. But But I think when it comes to humans, I think version 1.0 is better than version 2.0, because it's like the pure version of us. And I think that's why Chanukah maybe is so much around children. Maybe all the holidays are around children, but especially Chanukah. It's not just, obviously, Chanech l'nar al pi darkei, educating a child is the way to shape the future. But it's also because it's the child spirit. It's the child within, as they say, our inner child, and the children that are able to bring out that pure oil. It says, that's what it says, that children are tahirim. So yovet tahirim, yisasku v'tahirim. That's why there was a custom to start, when you teach children, you start from the most difficult book in the Torah, is the third book, Leviticus. But it talks about tahara, about purity, about korbanos, about pure offerings. So because pure things need pure experiences. So maybe this is an opportunity to maybe get back to our purity and our innocence. The Ishtam, the Tmimus, Ishtam Yeshav Ahalim, that talks about Yaakov. And recognize, who are you? You are not a product of your environment. You're not a victim of circumstances. And as much as darkness may be part of your life, it's not who you are. It's what you do. Just like I always say when people say, who are you? And they give you their business card. Your business card is what you do. It's not who you are. Who you are is a very different thing than what you do. You can be busy all day and night with something, and it's not necessarily who you are. Chanukah tells you who you are. You're a walking flame. You're a walking fire that is able to transform everything around you, illuminate and warm everyone and everything. That's who you are. Whether you're living up to it or not is a second question. Now the goal is to live up to it. And until you don't become confident in that side of yourself, you're really not going to live up to your greatest potential. If you give in to other voices or other people telling you what you are, then you're really not. It's like believing a fairy tale about who you are and not believing what you're really capable of. And that's the worst possible thing. So I hope some of these words maybe will shake up some people to think about their lives a little differently. Nothing wrong with being shaken up from time to time. If it doesn't shake up, then maybe I wasn't successful. So be it. But I have enough self-esteem to say, okay, that's not, I'm not going to define myself by my failures, But the point is that we should all have a very happy Chanukah, the continuing days, and take the message to heart. Put it in your own words. Find the right words for you, for your family, children, and it can make all the difference. Not just for Chanukah, but obviously carrying the light throughout the whole year. So it should be a very blessed year and a very blessed, illuminated and warm. And ask yourself, when you meet people, after they leave your presence, do they feel warmer and more brighter and clearer? That's your goal. If the opposite is true, that's what you have to make sure to change. So imagine that every time somebody meets you, you could say, before I met you, I wasn't as happy, I wasn't as hopeful, I wasn't as clear, I wasn't as warm as after I met you. And thank you for illuminating and warming. If we all thought in those terms and those were the expectations, I think we probably have a little better world. What do you think? What do you think, right? So everyone have a happy Chanukah, and we continue this journey every Wednesday. And welcome again, the new faces I haven't seen, but I know you said you've seen me, so I guess we know each other, or at least you know me more than. And then until next Wednesday, everyone be blessed. Happy Chanukah. Thank you. Okay.